Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm your host, Matt Bennett. Each episode we talk about the research and practical aspects of the trauma informed movement. This podcast is not designed to replace mental health services. If you feel uncomfortable or triggered by our discussion, please consider seeking your own trauma treatment. In no way is seeking treatment an admission of weakness. It is a chance to build resiliency and experience post-traumatic growth. You can find show notes, resources, and more at traumainformedlens.org. Welcome, friends, to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I am Matt, and I'm just here by myself today. It's been a while since I've done a solo one, but there's so much going on in the world that I just wanted to reach out and connect with folks. I don't think I have anything groundbreaking to say. In fact, one of the reasons you haven't heard from me, I made a couple of choices. One is to shut up, which, if you know me, shutting up is not my greatest strength. But I really wanted to, whether it's the marches, whether it's hearing people talk on podcasts or the news, I really know as a white cisgender male that this is a time for me to learn. And so I've intentionally been a little quieter than normal and tried to really learn from voices I respect, and also to search out new voices that I can also learn from as well. So I'm also trying for our podcast, because I really, while I'm shutting up, I really do think we can really learn a lot about what's going on by putting the trauma-informed lens on top of current events, the Black Lives Matter movement, and other things. I think it gives us, sometimes, at least for me, using my research on trauma, neurobiology, especially right now, a lot of this fight or flight response, if you look at least my Facebook feed and what I'm seeing, I think we can gain a greater understanding of some of these issues. And yet, just so you know, I'm trying to engage leaders in the social justice movement, especially around the Black Lives Matter movement, that I know, to be guests on the show to bring their lived experience to those conversations. I feel like hearing a white guy's perspective on how trauma's impacting this moment in history, probably not all that useful. And so I'm working to get some folks on that I really respect here. If you have any that you think I need to talk to, please send those my way as well. I haven't been able to send anything out because a lot of these leaders that I know are extremely busy right now. A lot of them are service providers as their day job, and a lot of them I know don't distinguish between providing services to their community and their work in social justice. So even though I'm really excited to get those conversations going with people, I'm also really respecting that the folks that I want to get on have a lot of important things to do. So those might actually be delayed a little bit as well. The one thing that I wanted to reach out today, because I feel like I got a tool that maybe not everybody got along the way. And it's a tool that served me really well in my professional career in my life, because I grew up as I was getting trained in psychology in I was an undergrad in the mid 90s, graduate school for counseling psychologies in the late 90s. I was educated at a time where psychology was really, and I would say the helping professions in general, were waking up to the fact that we did not historically do a good job with race, with gender differences. We didn't do a really good job with what we call multiculturalism at the time. That was the word that I was used back when I was being trained. We didn't do good. And a lot of people in psychology were really waking up to the fact that, this cognitive behavioral stuff works really good for white folks. And, but we realized we couldn't generalize that without studying it further, without being engaging in different conversations. So, every class that I had, every textbook that I used, there was at least one chapter on that. And while I learned a lot from that, the one thing that I did take, and the one thing that I can really remember and recall, was this model that I actually think is flawed, but the early part of the model had really helped me. And it was a way to look at yourself and identify areas of your own, oftentimes unconscious bias. And it was just a 4-step process. And the first rung of that, where I just have always assumed I'm starting out in, is unconscious incompetence, where especially if you are not from the group that you're working with, you always need to be looking. And I'm saying this a little bit more stronger than it was taught to me through my now 20 some years of experience using this model of, what don't I know? What don't about this person's worldview, this person's community? What don't I know? And it was always on me as the paid professional to really search for that, to really look at, okay, what am I missing here? And, I think implicit unconscious biases are tough because they're unconscious, right? They're not necessarily in our face for us to kind of look at them. But this model really helped me is, where can I expand my thinking? And the whole goal, where I've spent so much time in my career, is between that unconscious incompetence and conscious incompetence. So in other words, the challenge for us when, again, and I say really for folks like myself with the privilege of being a white cisgender, male. I mean, I've got all the boxes of privilege checked off. I'm even tall, which some studies show is a privilege in and of itself too. I mean, I check off all the boxes. It's my responsibility to find areas where I don't have that knowledge and educate myself and try the best I can to understand or have empathy for another person's point of view, another person's lived experience. And do I always do that well? Absolutely not. This sometimes, I'll be honest, takes years. I was from I would say my high school class was probably in the high 90s of being white Indiana, mid Indiana white town. I didn't have a whole lot of exposure to other communities. Now college was a little bit eye-opening, but still was mostly white. And then coming in the professions, I started to work with the African-American community, specifically young men that were caught up in a gang war at the time. And, one of the things that I look back on and laugh, because I think it was ridiculous to me at the time, but Ebonics was the big thing. It's like there were serious scholars saying Black folks have their own language. And so I was going into this and, I just, and again, this was my assumption. It's just like, no, white people are cool enough to understand what Black folks are saying. Like we really need, if you pay attention to what these kids are saying, if you listen to their music, they're not speaking a different language. They're just a lot cooler than most of us were. So, but it was an enjoyment of realizing that, no, they're not talking a different language. I just need to expand my vocabulary, not to learn a whole different language. In hindsight, again, I think that was a very racist concept. I just needed to reach out and understand some of their slang, right? Some of their things and their music and their culture. And to me, that initial experience early on in my career where I got dumped into a situation where, where I was in very few crowds, where I was a minority. Now with the client population I was working with, oftentimes there are about 15 people in the cottage. Probably at any given time, probably 10 or 11 were Black youth. And so, I got to get engrossed in their culture and I just enjoyed that. I enjoyed being exposed to that and really understanding and confronting my unconscious bias, bringing that into my conscious bias, and then working my butt off to learn about their culture. Now, did I do that perfectly? Absolutely not. One of the other things that I have fallen back on in my career is having curious conversations with folks. I've made mistakes with my language. I made a couple last year with my language as a trainer. You get a room full of 100 people. All it does is to take offense to one person. I've shown videos over the years to thousands of people, got good laughs, but I showed it, maybe it's in a geographic area somewhere else where it rubs somebody the wrong way from their racial experience and their life experience, and never use that video again. You only have to give me one piece of feedback where this made you feel uncomfortable. Now again, may have shown it to thousands of people before, but times change, language change. It's on me to learn about their experience. So, but one of the things that I always have, whether it's working with trans folks or different ethnic, racial groups, it's being curious. And I think for a lot of us, we can't be afraid to have these curious conversations. If I've approached somebody from a different experience than me with curiosity and respect, and I don't usually do this, I don't usually walk up to folks and just start having these conversations. I usually realize that, hey, I'm feeling something here, and let's talk about it. And again, I do this, I believe, in a professionally appropriate way. But whether they're friends, whether they're coworkers, to have these conversations is where I learn, because you can only learn so much in a book. And I've always, again, when I went into the working in with the Black youth, I realized I gotta read. I've got to read about their history. I need to read about their history in Indianapolis. I need to read more about the civil rights movement, because I didn't have that lived experience. I didn't understand at all the experience of the Black youth I was trying to help. And in many ways, I'll never understand it, but can I get enough knowledge where I move that unconscious incompetent into conscious? And I don't really like the word competence anymore either, but at least I'm informed, right? I have learned enough where at least I have some of that intellectual understanding. And I also realized, I'll just tell you a story that I'm embarrassed of to death, but I think it just do this, is I worked for 3 years to read, study, talk to learn about, again, because the first 3 years of my career, probably about 80% of my clients were Black youth, to work and learn from and be as much of a supporter of that community as possible. Then I moved from Indianapolis to the Indianapolis area to Denver. In Indianapolis, I never had a Latinx client. There were just not many Latinx folks around Indianapolis at the time, and I say that, and I hope that research would play that out, but they weren't my clients. They weren't, I didn't have in my graduate class. I didn't have, so I just wasn't exposed to that culture. Now moving out to Denver, all of a sudden, the highly African American or Black youth population was replaced by Latinx youth, and all of a sudden, I'll remember this because I was working at a school at the time, and I had these amazing Latina staff members, and I knew, again, all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm kind of feeling that I just don't know enough. So I asked them to help me learn a little Spanish if they were open to it. I also learned that they were amazing cooks, and wow, nothing teaches you about a culture. Well, I'm not going to say nothing, but you learn something special about culture when you sit down and eat someone else's food. And boy, did I enjoy that experience. And so I was doing this, and I was like, okay, maybe I did all this learning, multiculturalism, cultural competency, again, words that we don't use that much anymore, but I spent hours on this. And then I'll never forget one of the most embarrassing moments is that I asked them when this Cinco de Mayo thing I'd been hearing about was. And so all of a sudden they just looked at me, and luckily I had the trust, right? I had trust, so they just kind of gave me a hug and explained to me that was actually a date. And so, boom, I realized I got very quick feedback that I was back into that unconscious incompetent. And while I had trust with them, so they could then correct me, teach me, I realized I got a lot of work to do, like learning that Colorado was once a part of Mexico, wasn't always a part of the United States. You know, those sort of learning things gave me an appreciation, going to events, working with organizations that work with the Latinx population specifically, and really asking to be taught of that. And again, part of that is, hey, if you can help teach me, if you can help evolve my language, great. However, it's also on me as, again, a white man of privilege to get my butt into the library and read, because as someone in that community that I'm trying to learn about, it's not your responsibility to teach me, right? So that still lies within me, though, again, you can only learn so much in the book. And again, I say Latinx, and it's sort of another example of where we're evolving, because you know, I was the H word, which I don't even say anymore because I know it offends a lot of people. You know, I don't know if I ever use that word that much, but I know that that's offensive to a lot of folks. You can look at the history of that word, though I know a lot of people that identify as that word also use that word as well. So again, but as again, a white man with an understanding of where white men created that word and what it was for, don't use it. You know, was using Latino, Latina for a while, and now Latinx. I struggle with it a little bit, not because of wanting to disrespect the transgender population at all, but I know some people that I respect thinking don't like that term. And so I'm kind of stuck as a white guy trying to learn what the right language is. And from my perspective, I see a lot of leaders and advocates in that community using that terminology. You know, but again, I'm very cautious of that, and I kind of cringe a little bit every time I say it because I don't want to be offensive. I think I'm using the best word possible, but again, I'm open to feedback otherwise. So again, we go from that unconscious incompetence, and we always want to be looking at, if we're working with a different population or lived experience than we come from, always looking for that area, always looking for opportunities to learn. Now, this is a quality thing as well. The better I understood the communities I was working with, the better I was as a therapist, a case manager, somebody that helped design programs. The more knowledge that I gained, the more conversations I had, I was better at my job. I was better at helping people. When we see that and we identify, and I hope, especially my white friends out there, look for your areas of growth right now. I'll give you another example. I'll make myself a little bit vulnerable here, but when I first saw defund police, something hit, something just happened inside of me. It was one of those unconscious things. It's like, oh, but I knew a lot of really great police officers. You know, you know, and I get this as a white man. The worst interactions have been speeding tickets that I've had. I've never felt afraid in my life. So I understand that's not the shared experience with other populations, but you know, and I get all that, but it's still like, oh. So I had this, okay, is this an unconscious level of incompetence? And this is what I hate right now about social media, is that nobody's taking a step back, especially the people on my social media phone that, you know, you should only talk about race so much if no people of color are involved in your stream. That's just my opinion. But I was like, okay, I had a reaction to this. Why? And as I dug into this, I found that I agreed with a lot about that statement. I think there's conversations happening is, could we brand this a little bit different? And I'm interested in that conversation. But, shifting money from militarized law enforcement to maybe shifting from the military approach to law enforcement more to the social work, social services, integrating more of that. And again, I there are calls to just abolish the police out there. But I realize that there is a differentiation between defund and abolish. And, again, we may be using different words to describe this later on, but, I understand the sentiment because, I think for me, my experience with the police has been more positive than negative. As a white man of all my privilege, yeah. Now, I hate getting a speeding ticket, but that's nothing compared to what, black folks experience, the fear they experience in their lives, right? Can't compare those two things. So when we look at this, it's not like we're going to abolish law enforcement, but we're going to shift the balance. We're going to bring in more of a social justice, social work approach to community safety. And, part of this education is looking at the history of police force, not going way back in our country's history, and seeing how these, even before we called them police, there were these entities, whether they were searching for runaway slaves, whether they were enforcing racist policies, not just in the South. If you don't think racism only belongs in the South, you've got some history to read about how northern cities enforced this as well. There's a history there. And I'm kind of wondering if the word police is a word we might not be using 10 years from now because of the historical perspective that it has. Now, the one thing why I say, I think the word competence has been an interesting thing. And I want to kind of end with this because the goal back in the day, and this is the late 90s, so, it's hard for me to say that, boy, that was 20 plus years ago now. So there's been a couple generations since then, is you try to get to this unconscious competency. And I look back on that, and I in hindsight, having been now 20 plus years in my career working with, whether it's the black youth I worked with, initially the Latinx folks here, people in poverty, LGBTQ plus in my work in HIV, people that might be struggling with certain physical, emotional issues, mental health, and the stigma around that. So looking at these, I really have come to the conclusion that we can't use the word unconscious competency if we don't have the lived experience. Now you might argue an exception to that in some way. But the word competency is no. Now, maybe I work with a community for 25 years and I've learned I'm always looking for new unconscious biases, unconscious incompetencies, but I build up that like 10,000 hour sort of pieces that, Gladwell and Dweck talk about with the growth. But I've had that experience. Maybe I don't have to have necessarily the conscious thoughts. Maybe I'm more on automatic pilot, but, I think we really need to be careful as, especially if you're in the privileged population like I am, to say, hey, I've got unconscious competence when I work with the black youth. No, I don't think I ever will, because there's going to be a racial dynamic between them and me that I always need to be conscious of, right? Now, I might have 10,000 hours of learning. I might have 10,000 hours of practical experience. But every time I sit across from a client with that lived experience, they've had lived experience of white people that I've never had. They've had lived experience of law enforcement. So I think I always need to keep that in my consciousness. And that's the one area of that model is, yeah, it's kind of like self-actualization on Maslow's thing. Yeah, maybe some like Jesus, Buddha, get there, but the rest of us, we're just working on those lower levels. And I think if we try to get there, we're probably, our ego's not allowing us to see our new levels of unconscious incompetence. I think the challenge for all of us, one is to show up and listen. I think that's hard it's hard. I know it's hard for me because I think we have so much to say and we want to be supportive in what we say, but I think if you have a platform, my challenge to you, especially if you're a white person of privilege like myself, how can you use that platform to get some of these other great voices in our community, an extended audience, to give them a voice? Doesn't mean we won't have things to say. I think we'll be processing this under the trauma-informed lens this last few weeks for years to come. But how can we hand over the microphone, so to speak, and listen to other people's voices? Because again, I'm finding, even though I've worked my butt off on this for now 25 plus years of identifying unconscious incompetence, bringing that into conscious incompetence, busting my butt to at least have a intellectual or cognitively informed understanding of how I can best support the person sitting across from me. I've got so much to learn. And again, I think the defund police for me, even though, and we're moving so quick because even that term is being defined as we speak, I had that reaction, right? And so going from that reaction to the experience of, okay, I got to learn. And so if you're somebody in my position out there, listen, find that a place for you to learn, show up, march, do this support. I believe that there's some momentum that I just haven't seen in my lifetime. I am hesitant because, you see things come and go, but boy, I tell you what, I want to end on this. One of the things I've been impressed here in Denver is the millennials sometimes get a bad rap, but man, the young leadership. I'll give some props to those, Gen Xers and Boomers for helping. I don't know what school these folks went to. I don't know, but there's some powerful voices. When I say trying to turn over the platform, how do we invite maybe these leaders into our organizations, right? Because if you're a helping organization, you better be having conversations around race right now, right? And bringing in outside voices might be a great way to help spark those. So just these young leaders, and they're coming from this powerful place that inspires the hell out of me, but they also have something to teach all of us as well. I'm going to leave you with my one thing that just is sticking in my mind about one of the marches that I went to. This was these young leaders at our state house steps, giving some speeches. We were chanting, we were doing all that, and then some older folks came out of the state house and came down and asked them if they could kind of share the stage for a second. And I thought it was really powerful that here are the organizers of this protest, these brilliant young people, handed over to folks more my age from the legislator, announcing a bill that they just got through committee to address police violence at a state level. Very progressive bill, at least from what I've seen at the state level right now. And I just like the symbolism of that. And so it's like the young people hand the microphone over to the older folks like myself, and there was a powerful exchange of the older folks handing the microphone back over to these young leaders. and they led us on the march. So again, I think if you don't think you have anything to learn, you probably haven't been to one of these marches and listened to some of these young voices, because I stand in all of them, and I hope I can find ways to support that voice moving forward. So much love to everybody. Man, we've been through a pandemic. We're going through a social maybe revolution in our country. Both of those I know have hit our services, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in social work, education. These things have hit us big time. And so one is take care of yourself. I hope to get a podcast out here from a presentation I did where we can really look at our advocacy as self-care, because I think that's really important to really see that as part of our self-care. So please take care of yourself. If you can, get your body out there, show up. If you're like me and you've had that privilege and platform, try to shut up, listen, give other people's voices a chance to rise to the top. I hope to model that here in the upcoming weeks. But I just want to thank you all for all the work you do. I think our Black friends right now, they need us there. They need us on the streets with them. They need us listening to them. When you hit something like defund police and something happens in you, take a breath. That's an implicit bias. You may not have had one of those in a while. So take time, sit with it, learn about it. Let them push you, right? Let them push you into uncomfortableness. Figure out what that is, right? And don't think sometimes that you're going to resolve that within 10 minutes. There may need to be some work there. So thank you. Take care of yourselves. Not much in the notes this time, but traumainformedlens.org is always where you can find everything. Like I said, I hope to get some relevant episodes out here pretty quickly, though I also don't want to take my social justice friends away from the important work they're doing right now. So hopefully at some point I can get those voices on so we can all learn from them in a much deeper way. But thank you for all the work you do. Keep fighting the good fight, whether you're in a hospital keeping people with COVID alive, whether you're on the streets fighting for social justice and change. Thank you, and thank you for your time.